Have you wondered why someone who, at some point in life, had access to a lot of money, you find someone who is well to do, is well boxed up, as we would say it in local parlance, but all of a sudden falls into financial difficulties, into abject poverty, and even ends up in debt? This happens all the time. We see it around us. So in this episode precisely, I'm going to be looking at 3 rules on how to manage your first capital. This is rather very important because in reality, most of the time, the first major money that comes into our possession, the first real money you come in contact with, determines a lot about your financial stability in the future. If you manage it well, from there, you could say final goodbye to poverty. You could walk into a very new level of sufficiency where you might really never have to beg again for bread. It might not really guarantee that you become stupendously rich, but it would guarantee that you never run into abject poverty. Not at all. But if you manage it wrongly, chances are that in the next 20 years, you will be trying to recover, but you might never be able to recover. That is why this particular episode of Factual Briefing falls in line with what we're doing here, which is about migration, money, and positioning. So if you are new here, my name is Willis. Welcome to the channel. On Factual Briefing, what we discuss is about immigration, about money, and about strategic positioning. Now, if it is something that interests you, please, I welcome you to subscribe to the channel if you are not yet a subscriber. What I discuss on this channel are mistakes which people only realize when the consequences are already around them and already too late for them to reverse course. First of all, let's look at why first capital matters. Most times, people think that financial success depends only on how much one earns. Most people think that financial success depends on how big a person's income is or continues to be over time. No, that is not the case. Research in behavioral finance have shown very clearly that what really determines a person's financial success is how he or she behaves when that person begins to see real money in his hands. When somebody begins to earn, how that person responds to that development in his life. This is what really determines his financial success down the line. And this is not my opinion. This is research that is out there about behavioral finance of individuals. Morgan Housel, a writer who wrote The Psychology of Money, he said, doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. One of the most important behavior in a person's financial life is how that person responds to real capital, the first real capital that comes into his hand. Your first savings, your first big salary, your first business profit, your first money-making opportunity, whether you live abroad or whether you live back home. It is inconsequential. The attitude is what matters. Your temperament about and around money is what determines your financial stability. How you respond by the time you begin to see real money come into your hands. That is the moment that really matters in your financial stability. This is what research has shown, as you've seen in what the writer Morgan Housel wrote about persons or people's behavioral style when they come in contact with real capital. So financially speaking, this is about the most dangerous moment in a person's life. My observation have shown that people who eventually end up successful financially, who end up being financially stable in their life, have all observed certain very important rules in their life as it regards to their first capital. And my observation has shown 3 very important rules. In this episode, I'm going to briefly look at these very important 3 rules that I have seen work in the life of very successful people that forms their attitude to the very first capital that came into their hands. Now, rule number 1. Your first capital must build foundation and not comfort. Now, this is something very basic, but it's something that is ignored by most people. The very first money that comes into your hand must be used to build foundation. It must be used to lay a proper financial foundation for you. It shouldn't be channeled into building comfort, believing that you have arrived. This is the mistake I have seen around people. And this is a rule I have seen that most successful people imbibed in their life that laid a foundation for what they see today as stupendous wealth. But on the contrary, most people do the opposite. Because I've seen that this is where people make their first money mistake in life, which sometimes turns out to cost them so dearly. So the moment money starts coming in, the first instinct is to improve lifestyle for most people. The temptation is always there. Buy a better car, build a house quickly. Sometimes this house turns out to be a mansion in your country home. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen people around me make. You are tempted to upgrade everything, to show your progress to everyone, to prove success to family and friends. For migrants, that is people who eventually relocate abroad, this pressure is even a lot harder on them. Because by the time you see people relocate and begin to see foreign currency, they begin to earn in pounds, in USD, in euro, depending on what part of the world you have found yourself. Now, the very first thing is to show people back home that that journey was worth it. Make them understand that that journey they took was not in vain, that yes, they have arrived. You see them doing things to actually impress people back home, to now believe that relocating abroad has now answered all their questions and has provided solution to all their problems. But financial research have shown that this very attitude, this very behavior of individuals is really very dangerous. Now, Thomas Stanley, the author of the book, The Millionaire Next Door, found that many people who look wealthy early in life are often the ones who struggle later because they spend too much trying to look successful before they become stable. What more can I say? What I see around me is people trying to look rich without being rich. Looking rich and being rich are actually two different things. Without stability, people want to give you the impression that they have arrived. But the opposite is actually what people who have actually made it in life. The opposite is what they adopted, trying to first of all lay foundation for stability before trying to look rich, if ever at all that particular part of life even attracts them in any way. Because looking rich to some people is actually very irrelevant. What is important is being rich, and that is what you need. Try to become rich, achieve financial stability. Whether you look rich or not is completely irrelevant. Now, rule number 2, first capital must create second capital. In economics, this is called capital formation. Now, you don't just have to spend money. Money should be spent to create more money. This is the difference between consumption and investment, as Peter Obi, a Nigerian politician, will always say. Our politics must focus on moving Nigeria from consumption to production. He may have spoken as a politician, but the point he made, that notion, that concept in his head, is very much akin to what Warren Buffett also once said. Do not spend what is left after spending. Spend what is left after saving. People who build financial stability actually understand this very early. When their first real money comes, they look at how to multiply. So they think of multiplication and not enjoyment. They ask some questions like, how can this money grow? How can this money generate income? How can this money create another opportunity? This does not always mean big investments. Sometimes it just means saving consistently, starting a small business carefully, buying assets gradually, learning before spending, and reinvesting profits instead of consuming them. But unfortunately, most people do the opposite. When their first real money comes, they are what I would call their first capital. When it comes, they don't think about investing. They don't think about how to multiply that first capital. The first thing that comes to their mind is enjoyment. The first thing that comes to their mind is how to procure comfort, how to look rich, how to give the impression that they have arrived. And before you know it, the first capital is completely blown. It disappears. Now you see them trying to start from ground zero. They start entirely afresh. And when another opportunity does not show up, you see them struggling. So you see somebody who was or who looked rich at some point, who was in real possession of real capital, somebody who appeared to be financially affluent, now turns up as poor as you would never have expected him to be, because the first chance he got in seeing real money, he blew it. He never really thought of investing. He never really thought of multiplying what has come into his hands. He never really thought of achieving stability. He never really thought of laying proper foundation to make sure that what has come into his hand does not disappear. Now, rule number 3. Never use your first capital without a plan. You have seen rule number 1. You've seen rule number 2. Now, rule number 3 is also connected to 1 and 2. Even though sometimes you can evade the pressure of going for comfort with your first capital, you can also come into the understanding that your first capital should be used to create additional capital. Now, you have tried to obey rule number 1 and rule number 2, but this third stage is where some people still get it wrong. You have tried not to be wasteful. You've tried to make some investment. You've tried to start a business. You've tried to invest in some form of asset or the other. But where people get it wrong is doing this without proper knowledge. It's good to understand your first capital should not be wasted. It should be used to create additional capital. It should be used to lay proper foundation. But what is also very important is for you to understand that you must take this step with the required understanding. You must understand that investing, starting a business requires structure. It requires the right kind of knowledge. You don't have to buy a property because somebody told you that it is worth doing. You don't have to start a business because you've seen somebody that started the business. You don't have to make any form of investment at all because you've seen some rumors here and there, or you've seen somebody who have done the same thing and succeeded, or some rumors tells you that if you do this, you are going to succeed. Don't do things because others have done it, others are doing it. Don't be a copycat. This is what in behavioral economics professionals call the herd mentality. That is trying to do something because others are doing it. So don't just do things because others are doing it or somebody has done it, even though that person has succeeded. Try to make an independent decision, something you are convinced that you are taking the right step. One thing you must understand is that wealth is not built just by copying. Wealth is built by planning. You can copy, but copy with a plan. You must understand exactly what you are copying. Don't be like those people back in the days in school who would, while looking at your paper to copy what you've written, they will copy including your name, your surname, your date of birth, and even your matric number, everything as part of the answer. Even if you are copying what another person has done, copy with a plan, copy with understanding. That is a way you can build wealth, by doing what others have done. Don't just start a business because somebody is doing the business and is succeeding. Don't just invest in a property or in any kind of asset because you've seen people doing it, or because people who are doing it have already succeeded in doing it. That is not enough. You must have understanding of how they started, why they are where they are, why they succeeded. Because even though they have succeeded, there are also people who have failed in the same kind of business. You cannot be part of failure. You should be able to join those who have succeeded by copying what they have done right. Copy with understanding. So before using your first capital, you should know what is the objective, what is the risk, what is the timeline, what happens if this fails, what happens if this works. You should be able to ask and answer these questions. That will determine if that particular decision you have made about using your first capital is actually the right one. It is important to ask these questions. Ask yourself these questions and answer them. You don't answer them by just sitting somewhere and thinking. Do your research. Ask around. Put facts and figures in place. Do your mathematics where necessary. If you're able to ask and answer these questions correctly, then you would know that you are actually deploying your first capital in the right format. Because without a plan, whatever you are doing becomes an experiment, and you cannot experiment with your first capital. If you experiment with your first capital, chances are that you will get burnt. And when you get burnt, the money will disappear. First capital sometimes is a lot easier to come by, but when it goes, it's far more difficult to get another opportunity. So when you are lucky enough to come in possession of that your first capital, make a very good plan. have a very good understanding on how to deploy it in order to generate more capital, in order to lay a proper foundation, in order to try to create a more and far well-defined financial stability for you and whoever depends on you down the line. So everything I have talked about regarding the rules may look so simple, but I can tell you it is not easy. Your very first capital might look so small, but I can assure you one thing. It will determine whether you spend the next 10, 15, or even 20 years trying to continue on the path of success or trying to recover from early mistakes. The very first step you take on how you handle or how you manage your first capital determines a lot about what your tomorrow will look like financially. So as I try to, let me recap the rules again. Rule number 1, build foundation, not comfort. Rule number 2, let capital create more capital. Rule number 3, never use capital without a plan. So while income gives opportunity, it gives you your first capital, but opportunity on its own does not guarantee success in any way. Only structure, only plan will determine what the outcome would be. So if everything I've talked about in this video is something you think or you feel that more people need to understand, please feel free to share this particular episode to anyone who you think needs to hear more about it, especially someone who just relocated abroad or someone who just started out in life, someone who just started earning real money. Share this video and it might help someone without you knowing it. This is Factual Briefing and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching.